Shalom, family. Peace be with you. This is Portrait Pioneers of Color. You know, we had done previous videos about the Messiah, the prophecy in Daniel chapter 9, about the 69 weeks, 70 weeks of years, trying to pinpoint when the Messiah would appear, and we covered that pretty well. But now let's go into a prophecy in the book of Daniel as well, talking about when the Messiah would return and when the kingship would be restored. We know that the mighty kingdom of Babylon under King Nebuchadnezzar, as we see here, Babylon had destroyed the temple in Jerusalem, and they had taken the tribe of Judah and the Israelites captive in the year 607 BCE. And they took Zedekiah. He was the last king to sit on the throne of David when Babylon came. And they also took another captive, Daniel the prophet. So we're going to get into this prophecy here about the prophecy in Daniel chapter 4 about when the Messiah would return and when the kingship would be restored. So let's go right into this. So in Daniel chapter 4, we notice here that this was talking about Nebuchadnezzar's dream. He had a dream of a tree. We go down to verse 13. He says, "In the visions I saw while lying in bed, I looked, and there before me was a holy one, a messenger." He goes on to tell, the messenger told him, cut the tree down, and leave off its branches, strip off its leaves, and scatter its fruit. Then goes on to say in verse 15, though, he says, "But let the stump and its roots, bound with iron and bronze, remain in the ground, in the grass of the field." So the tree was to be cut down, but the stump and the roots would be bound with iron and bronze or copper, and let it remain in the ground. Then it goes on to say in verse 16, he says, "Let his mind be changed from that of a man, and let him be given the mind of an animal or a beast, till 7 times pass by for him." 7 times. Okay, what is that? And then verse 17 says, "The decision is announced by messengers. The holy ones declare the verdict, so that the living may know that the Most High," which would be Yahweh, Yehovah, "the Most High is sovereign over all the kingdoms on earth, and he gives them to anyone he wishes, and sets over them the lowliest of people." So the Most High, Yehovah, can give his kingship to whoever he wants to, as it says there. Anyone he wishes, he gives that kingship to. So what is this talking about? Well, we know that the throne of Yehovah, which was represented through the royal line of King David, and it had been temporarily cut down. Again, Zedekiah was the last king to sit on that throne. So when Babylon invaded Judah, as it says here, Daniel 4:17 said that Yehovah, the Most High, would give the kingship to whoever he wanted to. Well, in Genesis chapter 49, verse 10, we remember the prophecy there. It said, "The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between its feet, until he to whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nations shall be his." So the scepter, or the kingship, that's what a king holds as a scepter, it would not depart from the tribe of Judah. Someone in the tribe of Judah would sit on that throne again. Zedekiah was the last king, but there would be someone that would come, and it would belong to him. So who is this? Who was this king that would come? Well, Daniel 4:17, as we said, there would be a waiting time. There would be a waiting period of 7 times. And we notice in Psalm 110, verse 1, a psalm of David, it said, "The Lord said unto my Lord, Sit thou at my right hand, until I make thine enemies thy footstool." So see, there would be a waiting period. He would sit at his right hand until I make your enemies thy footstool. Well, a footstool is something that a king would rest his feet on, correct? Yes. And then we go over to Psalm chapter 2, and we notice in verses 6 through 9 here, this is a psalm that was also written by David. And notice in verse 6, this is a prophetic psalm saying, I myself have installed my king on Zion, my holy mountain. Verse 7, let me proclaim the decree of Jehovah. He said to me, you are my son. Who is this talking about? Today I have become your father. Ask of me, and I will give nations as your inheritance. He's going to give nations as his inheritance, and the ends of the earth as your possession. Verse 9, you will break those nations with an iron scepter. Again, a scepter is something that a king would hold. And you will smash them like a piece of pottery. So, he's saying, you are my son. And he's saying that he's going to install his king on his holy mountain. And he would give the nations as your inheritance. This is in Psalm 2, verse 6 through 9. So, how long were the 7 times that we read there in Daniel chapter 4, verse 16 there, the 7 times. And there's a footnote there. If we pull that up, it says, or years. So 7 times means years, 7 years. And okay, so by the time of the flood, we notice that the time was divided into months of 30 days. We can get that from Genesis chapter 7, verse 11 and verse 24. I won't read this now, but you could look that up. Genesis chapter 7, verse 11 and verse 24. If you compare those verses, you'll see that it's talking about how the time was divided up there in 30 days, lunar months. Okay, and we know that the Egyptians, they also did that as well. They also created the calendar would to have the lunar months, remember, of the 30 days each. And even in Deuteronomy chapter 34 and verse 8, you could read that up as well. Deuteronomy chapter 34 verse 8, it mentions that when Moses died, the sons of Israel wept, it says, for 30 days. The sons of Israel wept for 30 days when Moses died. But these 7 times, these 7 years, after 607 BCE, that was when Nebuchadnezzar came and took the tribe of Judah captive. These 7 times, or these 7 years, nothing significant happened after 7 years. From 607, you're counting. The temple still had not been rebuilt, and there was still no king sitting again on the throne in Judah, in Jerusalem there. So that tells us that the prophecy of the 7 times here, or 7 years, was not meant to be understood as literal. It was 7 prophetic years. The appointed Gentile times had begun. And the Jews, as we said, the Jews' months were 30 lunar days, and so their years were 360 days long. 30 times 12, right? 360 days is a year. Ours is 365. Every once in a while we might have a leap year, but at that time, that is how they counted their time, was through the leap years. So the each day then stood for a year. And the Hebrew scriptures do give us precedent on that. They do show that in calculating prophetic time, a day is counted as a year. We have an example of that in Ezekiel chapter 4, verses 6, where Yahweh told Ezekiel to lie on his left side, and then he told him to lie on his right side. After you finish that, lie on your right side. And he was to do that for 390 days. And he says, you will bear the sins of the people. But notice in verse 6, he says, I have assigned you 40 days, a day for each year. So that's an example of that, of how a day in prophecy can refer to a year. We also have an example in Numbers chapter 14, verse 34, where it talks about according to the days of that you spied out the land, 40 days, a day for a year, a day for a year, you will answer for your error 40 days. We remember they did that. So these 7 years then is, in the prophecy of Daniel, it meant not 2,520 years, would be 60 times 7, but 2,520 years. So if we begin counting 2,520 years from 607 BCE, where do we end up? Who would take on that throne? Well, that brings us into the 20th century AD. So who would sit on that throne again? Well, we will